The father, Dadabhai, and his family were Khoja-Ismaili and relatively recent converts from Hinduism. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as he was named at birth, was born either in Jhik, a small town near Thatta, or in Karachi, either on 20th October 1875 or 25th December 1876. It was London that transformed Mr. Jinnah. Young Jinnah cultivated the habit of reading the morning newspapers cover to cover, something he continued doing till the end of his life. Go on to start Dawn, which still is Pakistan's leading English language daily. The Globe imbued him with a lifelong love for Shakespeare. In some ways, he seems to have internalized the lines, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances." Naoroji was probably the most important Indian statesman of his time. His drain theory, that is, the British Empire was systematically draining India of its resources. So today I want to talk about my book, Jinnah Alive. This was a book that I wrote pretty much in response to what I had seen for the longest time as this idea, this debate that had been going on about Jinnah being a very controversial figure given his role as the father of Pakistan. He's widely debated, and I thought, that perhaps it is important to delve into why a person like Jinnah, who called himself an Indian first, second and last, decided to make Pakistan, or the question of whether he actually wanted to make Pakistan. So all of these questions I've tried to answer in this book. Jinnah was the only politician in the subcontinent's history to be called the best ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. I think even at the very end, he was committed to the idea of a united India, but his conception of united India was entirely different from that of his Congress colleagues, from that of Gandhi and Nehru in particular. He believed that there had to be a contractual counterpoise between Hindus and Muslims, a compromise that would ultimately allow Muslims to have an equal say on the basis of parity in a united India, in the making of the Constitution of United India. That necessarily did not mean that he was completely against conceding a majority to the Hindus, but he believed that a divided society. So Jinnah was a fascinating character, and I think there's a lot in his personal life that needs to be discussed and that hasn't been brought forth. Chief amongst it, one of the things about Jinnah that is very, very important and which unfortunately is not spoken about is the fact that he was born into a Khoja-Ismaili family. Khoja community was unique because while they were Muslims at the one hand, they were also a community that was governed by the Hindu personal laws. I think that itself played an important part, an important role in defining Jinnah's identity, not just early on but later on as well. Very early on, in about 1901, he had left the Khoja-Ismaili community and become a Shia Khoja, or the Ithna Ashari Khoja. And this was because his sister, Mariam Peer Boy, was excommunicated for marrying outside the faith. Now that itself led to the excommunication of the entire Jinnah family. Khojas were not easy to include in a Hindu or Muslim category. It is also why the future Quaid-e-Azam of the India's Muslims was actually more suited to play the role he embarked upon early in his career, that is, the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. Sarojini Naidu had famously written, "Hindu by race, Muslim by religion. It might not be wholly idle to fancy something in the Khoja parentage of the child destined to become an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity." The father, Dadabhai, and his family were Khoja-Ismaili and relatively recent converts from Hinduism. It is not entirely clear when the family convert, but like most Gujarati Khojas, their origins can be traced back to the Lohana caste. Jinnah's origins, including the place and date of birth, are marred with controversy. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as he was named at birth, was born either in Jhik, a small town near Thatta, or in Karachi, either on 20th October 1875 or 25th December 1876. There's a discrepancy in the actual date of birth because the school record in Jhik shows former date, but the latter date is what he insisted upon in his life. The place of birth was hugely controversial in the early years of Pakistan's existence as a state. It was London that transformed Mr. Jinnah. So when he was 16 years old, Jinnah was sent to London by his father to work as an intern with Graham's trading company. There he ultimately changed his mind and chose law as his career. London had a lot to offer with its treasure troves of knowledge from the world over. Young Jinnah cultivated the habit of reading the morning newspapers cover to cover, something he continued doing till the end of his life. As biographers would comment, he had newspapers from all over the world mailed over to his house. Years later, he would be on the board of directors of Bombay Chronicle and then would go on to start Dawn, which still is Pakistan's leading English language daily. Jinnah also got himself a reading ticket to the London Museum and began attending the theatre at the famed Globe. The Globe imbued him with a lifelong love for Shakespeare. In some ways, he seems to have internalized the lines, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances." Shakespeare was not the only reading he did. He developed a keen interest in Roman history as well. Jinnah underlined these lines from Cicero: "Whenever you design to break off any friendship or displeasing acquaintance, you should loosen the knot little and not try to cut it asunder all at once." Meanwhile, in the political scene, there was a great tumult with the elections of grand old man of India, Dadabhai Naoroji, to the House of Commons around the time Jinnah was heading to London. Naoroji was probably the most important Indian statesman of his time. He had been the president of the Congress and a notable Freemason who rose to prominence because of his drain theory. That is, the British Empire was systematically draining India of its resources. The decision of the Liberal Party to support his candidature was a testament to the rise of British liberalism. This was also the age of John Morley and William Gladstone. The ideas that Jinnah had imbibed from his readings and his attendance of the House of Commons were to define his political future. As late as 1941, he advised his young colleagues and associates to read Morley's On Compromise. Naoroji was his other political role model. In Naoroji's ideas, Jinnah had found a sense of purpose and identity. He also decided that his work as an apprentice at Graham's was of no use to the life he wanted to lead. Soon afterwards, he decided to shift to law. The legal profession of the time did not require a law degree from university, and one could become a barrister by enrolling into one of the inns, which would make Jinnah's success in the profession even more extraordinary. He did not go into the profession by way of Cambridge or Oxford, as Nehru and Iqbal did after him. Gandhi before him had gone and studied jurisprudence and law before enrolling to become a barrister. Jinnah was entirely self-taught. The four inns of court are Lincoln's Inn, Gray's Inn, Middle Temple and Inner Temple. Jinnah scouted all the inns, but it was G.F. Watt's Justice Hemicycle of Lawgivers, a fresco completed in 1857, that clinched him. In the pictorial representation of the great lawgivers from history, Watts had also included the Prophet of Islam. While Jinnah had shown little signs of any religious devotion and would be famously irreligious in his later life, he considered this representation as a nod to his own heritage. The fresco is still there today at the Great Hall in Lincoln's Inn with the portrait of the Prophet in green. Unlike the sects, the Khoja-Ismaili sect had never been particularly squeamish about pictorial representations of the holiest figure in Islam. Years later though, the Quaid-e-Azam of Muslim India would omit the fresco from the story while telling it to his adoring Muslim followers. To get into Lincoln's Inn, he needed to pass the Little Go exam, which comprised English history, English language and Latin. He managed to get an exemption from Latin and passed the other two. He would later confide in his sister that he had promised himself that if he passed the Little Go, he would join Lincoln's Inn. Even though it was not a university, Lincoln's Inn had a demanding curriculum. It was only in his fourth attempt that Jinnah, who never actually matriculated and was only 18 years old, managed to pass his exams and become the youngest person to pass the exam. As he waited for his turn to be called to the bar, he tried his hand at acting. Soon he was offered a chance to act with a theatre company, which he accepted promptly. His acting career was cut short by a curt letter from his father, reproaching him not to shape the family. By the time he was called to the bar on 29th April 1896, Jinnah had anglicized his name, dropping Bhai at the end of his surname. He was now M.A. Jinnah. By the time Jinnah reached Karachi, he had come into his own element, virtually unrecognizable from the young boy who had left Karachi in a funny long yellow coat. He'd become a fastidious dresser, though he had not quite reached the sartorial elegance which would become second nature to him. So one of the things that we must consider is Jinnah's position on the Ahmadiyya issue. The Ahmadiyya issue was a potentially divisive issue for the Muslim community at the very moment that Jinnah was trying to bring together the Muslim community on one platform. So the Ahmadiyya issue had itself been around since the 1890s, which were targeted both the Shias and Ahmadis in the Muslim community. One of the things that the RR stood for was the excommunication of the Ahmadi community from the Muslim community at large. Now this was one of the demands that RR put forth in front of the Muslim League throughout the 30s. There were members of the Muslim League who wanted this, who wanted Ahmadis to be excommunicated. And there was an oath that there were many members of the Muslim League who agreed with RR. However, it was Mr. Jinnah who said, no, anyone who calls himself a Muslim is a Muslim. So Jinnah stuck by the Ahmadis. He was very clear about the fact that theological and doctrinal disputes should not be allowed to come into the definition of a Muslim. I think that is a key thing that brought Ahmadis to the Muslim League and brought them to support the Pakistan movement. I think it should be considered in the light of the fact that Ahmadis were ultimately excommunicated from Islam through a constitutional amendment in 1974.